Indian yoga at crossroads. It is very, very important to understand the fact that how far the growth of the systems of yoga in India are changing from 20th century onwards. Basically, we can see many people like B.K.S. Iyengar, Swami Rama, Ramdev Baba, Master C.V.V. and many other more people who have contributed richly for the concept of yoga. From 15th of 2015 July onwards, June onwards, we can see the identification of the performance of the International Yoga Day also. Even to this day, we have a particular doubt how far Indian yoga is to be identified. The problem is that the entire Indian context of yoga is having four important dimensions. One is the theoretical dimension, which is adopted from the Upanishads and the Sutras and yoga texts. The second one is the practical dimension. The third one is the spiritual dimension. And the fourth one is the functional dimension, which can be seen in the growth of the yoga for application in the regular way of life. In such a situation, how to understand the process of yoga, the progress of yoga, and the growth of yoga, and how far the system of currents of yoga are moving very changely in the Indian context, because most of the youth are not having any clear idea about the depths and functions of the aspects of yoga. And 99% of the yoga people who are teaching and learning, they are making it only from the secularist point of view. And secondly, when the government has taken more interest in identifying yoga only for the sense of the Ayush department or as a system of alternative therapy, the concept of understanding yoga in its spiritual way has been fast waning. In such a situation, how to understand the very identity of yoga? Where yoga stands in India? Is it like that of Patanjali, or is it like that of Hatha Yoga of Sattvarama, or is it like of Yogatharavadi of Adi Shankara, or is it like Yoga Sangraha of Nadamuni? Those things have gone totally, and there is much clumsy atmosphere in understanding the theory and practice of yoga. It has been very clearly told in Hatha Yoga Pradipika of Swatmarama that the very concept of Raja Yoga was totally misunderstood by different opinions. Even Patanjali's yoga, which was said to be a Hatha Yoga, was considered to be Raja Yoga by later people like Swami Vivekananda. In such a situation, where from the practitioners of yoga have to go? Is it simply for fitness? No, yoga is not for a fitness at all. Yoga is not a physical exercise at all. Yoga is not a mental exercise at all. It is a state of mind. It is a concept of mind. It is a harmony of the universal forces with the terrestrial forces. In such a situation, how we are going to identify the impact of yoga, and where we have to identify the location of yoga? This is the basic question in understanding the crossroads of yoga. The very word crossroads clearly indicates how yoga is moving. Is it a profession, or is it a vocation, or is it a personal practice? Is it for spiritual ascension? Yoga is basically only for spiritual ascension, and the health, the other aspects, they are all simply byproducts of yoga. In such a situation, how we are going to understand the concept of yoga? where yoga stands. It's a basic question because the government policies through the Department of Ayush and other allied branches, they are making it totally brought down to the common man who has no very idea of either the body or the mind or yoga itself. And yoga was said to be basically a darshana which is totally different, and it is an integral knowledge of the energy, space and mass. In such a situation, how we are going to understand the fortunes of yoga, where yoga stands in India? It's a basic question because 90% of the people, particularly among the youth who are opting yoga, they do not have a clear idea about the classical heritage of yoga as well as the classical practices of yoga. Many of the practices of yoga are kept in secret and they were not brought to the common man because yoga is not for the common living and common man, even though the government has adopted the concept of yoga for the common purposes. The very purpose of yoga is totally different. It should not be forgotten because yoga is a very peculiar subject which is totally misunderstood by most of the Western readers, Western writers and Western practitioners. And the impact of the Western thought on Indian yoga system has totally changed the very scenario of yoga. In such a situation, how we are going to understand the concept of yoga? If we take the practices like asanas, the practices like pranayama, or the practices like meditation, they were all trifurcated, and those people who are interested in practicing asanas, they don't go for meditation or they don't for pranayama. In such a situation, there is a problem in misunderstanding the interrelationship between different yoga practices. It has been told very clearly in the Yoga Tattva Upanishad itself that yogo hi bahuda brahman vijate vyavaharataha. Yoga is different in terms and it will be varying widely. It has been clearly told in Yoga Tattva Upanishad. It means in practice yoga is different, and that is why they have identified mantra yoga, laya yoga, raja yoga and hatha yoga. And the concept of raja yoga is identified in three important aspects of Sankhya, Taraka and Amanaska, and wherein Taraka is said to be the purification of the self, Sankhya is the inquiry into the self, and Amanaska is the experience with the Supreme. They all reach for what is called as the perfection in yoga. But how many students of yoga at present who are getting graduates in yoga education, either in yoga therapy or yoga counseling or yoga teaching, are having a clear idea about the system of distinguishing the Sankhya, Taraka and Amanaska? And secondly, Patanjali has clearly told that there is a concept of Pratyak Chaitanya which will be functioning very clearly in the adapting to yoga. And he has identified on the base of the Pratyak Chaitanya the Samprajnat Samadhi and Asamprajnat Samadhi. And Patanjali had given more importance to the concept of Samadhi, which was not totally accepted by many of the people. Most of the people have referred and interested in identifying, instead of Samadhi, the concept what we call as the consciousness. So they are more particular about the consciousness and the supremacy of the consciousness. Then yoga can become the science of consciousness, science for consciousness, science with consciousness, and practice with consciousness. So when this particular totality is taken into as a unit of consciousness, then only we can have to understand that yoga is for consciousness. It is not for health. Health is simply a byproduct. Yoga is a symmetric approach towards the assimilation of the mass, energy and space, which will be leading for the purification of the human being into a total identity.